I'm joined again, lucky enough to be with Dr. Shaham Das. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Mr. Hunley. It's always a pleasure to see you. How have you been?
I actually wanted to talk to you because I noticed last time we talked, you had superheroes behind you, specifically DC superheroes. And there is a DC superhero who has kind of been in the news a bit lately and is showing a pattern of behavior that, in my opinion, could be something you would wind up addressing, or somebody like you might end up addressing in a courtroom down the road. And that would be EZRA Miller.
The Flash.
The Flash.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think the news was as big here in the UK as it was in the States, but we've certainly, some of it's trickled through. So the things that really stand out to me are his kind of antisocial behavior. So on the surface, he seemed like sort of quite a chilled, potentially hippie-ish kind of person. There's certainly interesting, unusual aspects to him, refusing to be gendered. But behind it all, he's actually quite antisocial in ways. So from what I know, he got arrested with some sort of cannabis charge in 2011. There's accusations of him choking women after an argument in 2020. He threw a chair at a karaoke event. So yeah, he definitely has antisocial and impulsive and quite aggressive tendencies, I think.
Okay, so what you've observed and seen, I'm sure you would agree with me that this is not typical behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's somebody who has a very short temper, is very reactive, as I said before, quite impulsive. The other thing I do wonder, and there's a degree of speculation, obviously, because I haven't assessed him in person, is I wonder if you get somebody that's a bit of a Hollywood superstar, because he's a pretty big time actor, and to be in the Justice League's a big deal. That makes him almost A-list, I would say. I wonder if that kind of feeds into somebody who's a bit narcissistic. If they get treated like a celebrity, if they get treated like royalty, I wonder if that makes them feel more entitled. So I don't have to follow the law. I'm a celebrity. You are just common people. I can do what I want. You don't get to argue against me. And if somebody does stand up to me, then, I can do whatever I want because I'm special.
There is something to that. I think that a lot of celebrities, especially when they get to a certain level, are in a bubble of sorts. And they have, would you call them enablers? People around them who are just yes people. Yes. No, you're right. You're right. They're wrong. They're dumb. You're the best. You're wonderful.
I think it probably depends on the background personality of that celebrity as well. So if you take somebody like, I don't know, Keanu Reeves, he's got a reputation of just being a really nice guy in all kind of situations and circumstances. So it's not just being in that sort of narcissistic bubble, and it's not just having your ego stoked. I think you've got to have some personality flaws in the background, and maybe they hadn't come out because you weren't as confident to do what you wanted to do, whatever the hell you wanted to do, until you became famous.
Well, that's an interesting point too. It seems like some of the actors who have the reputations of being more down to earth sometimes achieve their success a little bit later in life. Like someone who almost came up or became a celebrity very early on, maybe they didn't get as much exposure to, I think Adam Carolla calls it gravity, which I think is a great term. It's like people who had to, it really sucked and they had to get by. They had the crappy jobs. They were the bartender, they're the waiter or carpenter or what have you, versus someone, and it's not their fault per se, but if they grow up and they're, famous before they're out of puberty, I wonder if that could be a factor as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here. It's, as you say, it happening at a very young age before you've actually reached personal maturity, and also the speed at which that it happens. So a lot of people who become celebrities, they have mini steps. So they get some exposure. Like if we're talking about actors, they play like co-star roles, or they play in sitcoms and they get a bit more exposure, and they get used to being famous. So as their fame increases, they get used to it, then it increases more. You take that versus somebody who becomes a star overnight, they probably just don't know how to deal with it because they probably have some sort of narcissism or quest for fame. I'm not saying all actors are like that, but I think a high proportion probably are. And then suddenly overnight, you get exactly what you want, and people, are praising the ground that you walk on. Brands are trying to give you money. You make millions of dollars per movie. Men or women throw themselves at you. So it's probably quite hard for a lot of people to balance this level of fame so quickly.
Okay, now I sent you a video that I did with a good friend of mine, also across the pond, Gavin Stone, that was looking into Tokata Iron Eyes, aka Gibson. I'm not sure what name she's going by right now. And there was some worries and some speculations about whether she in fact was with EZRA of her own free will, or what was going on. And now obviously you're not seeing her as a patient, but you could maybe assess the situation or give your thoughts theoretically.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry to be controversial, and with all due respect to your guest, I don't fully believe, or believe's the wrong word. I don't fully agree with his analysis.
Okay.
So I think Gavin was saying that Tokota's presentation between the two videos was very different. So in the first video, when she was talking about some of her political passions, she was speaking a different tone. She was kind of looking off in different directions compared to the second video. And I agree that is correct. But I don't think you can make any accurate inferences about her state of mind necessarily, because it could be as simple as, I'm not saying he's definitely wrong. I'm just saying that I don't think he can presume that he's right. So it could be that she was just a lot more personally upset in the second video than the first video, because in the first video, even though she's talking about being victimized and being wronged very reasonably, she's talking about something that's more of a political and social issue. Whereas in the second video, she is talking about something that feels probably more like a personal attack on her from her parents. So I guess what I'm saying is that in itself, in my view, could be a reason why she's speaking at a slightly different sort of a different tone, a different rate, a slightly different body posture. I think Gavin picked up on the fact that the setup was a little bit weird, which I agree. It was kind of behind a wall with very little space being shown. But I mean, I know from my own personal experience that sometimes you just do with what you've got at the moment in time. So I record most of my videos in a nice setting in my living room with my big Marvel and DC poster behind me. I can't do that today because my kids have got a play date, so they're being around there. So I guess my point is I think we're limited in what we can infer by the background. And, we couldn't see her hands or her legs. And I think Gavin might have even suggested that we don't know if she's being tied down or not.
Which I don't think so, because she did do that. So,
okay.
I mean, but it's fair, but she was very restrictive in her movements.
Yeah, but I don't know. Does that mean that she was being sort of bullied or pressurized? I mean, like I said before, I don't think you can 100% rule it out, but I don't think you can assume it either. And I think another thing that I picked up on that video was that she was speaking kind of almost hypothetically rather than about herself. She was saying, she was using phrases like some people think, or some people are saying, rather than being direct. And again, I don't think that necessarily is a way of her sort of circumventing the circumstances. It could just be that she didn't want to be too direct, and she didn't want to, call out her parents publicly on social media, especially considering the context. So I suppose my overall conclusions is that I find it difficult to come up with any definitive conclusions about the situation that she was in. I mean, there's a kind of theory that EZRA was standing behind the camera and was kind of forcing her to state these words. I'm not really sure I believe it, to be honest. I think it's just her in a really frustrated and distressed situation, speaking from her heart.
On that note, a lot of people in the comments stated that it looked like she could be referring to a script or referring to some sort of notes that were posted on the side.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I buy that, to be perfectly honest, Eric. And again, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm definitely right. But I read from scripts sometimes when I do some of my videos, and I'm looking at them for a longer period of time and scrolling at them, quite thoroughly, whilst trying to give the impression that I'm looking at the camera. She did look off, but then, even in this conversation we've had so far, I've looked off when my mind's like really, when my cogs are turning, I'm trying to really concentrate and focus on the next word. That doesn't mean that, I'm being prompted by something that's off screen. So I'm not as convinced, I think. Maybe it's just my skeptical nature, but I'm not as convinced in the conspiracies as everyone else is.
No, I mean, by the way, the notes could have been hers. So that's all I'm saying is a lot of times you might just have one word. And
sorry, so if you don't mind, I'm going to add something to that. Despite everything I've just said, right? So what my opinion was is that I don't think you can conclusively say that Tokata was being sort of physically pressurized or bullied to make her statement on camera. Despite that, I also do think that there's quite a high possibility of indirect pressure coming from EZRA Miller. And I'll tell you why, because they've had a relationship, I presume platonic, until I've been told anything different. That's what I presume it is, since she was 12 years old. And he was a young adult, but still an adult. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think it's more feasible in my mind that she's been kind of mentally or psychologically groomed. I don't know if groomed's the right word. It probably is groomed, actually. Or at least
she was young.
Pressurized. Yeah. She's pressurized because you don't, she's obviously an articulate and intelligent person and had passions with very political issues from a young age. She was speaking publicly from the age of 9, but she's still a child. So when you meet somebody at 12, you're quite easily influenced by somebody, especially if they are quite charismatic, famous,
handsome,
Hollywood star, handsome. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'm saying is in my mind, and there's a whole degree of speculation because nobody really knows unless you assess or talk to these people in person.
Oh, it's also been pointed out that it's they, and I forget it. It's unintentional, but Tokata is they, EZRA is they, them.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that as well. So it gets confusing when you're talking about two people, though, isn't it? Because you don't know which they you're referring to.
That's why sometimes I'm just like, with EZRA, I can kind of cheat and just say EZRA this, EZRA that, EZRA this, EZRA that. So it just like drop the whole pronoun so I don't mix it up just by keep hammering the name over and over, which still sounds awkward, but at least I'm trying to be respectful.
Yeah. It's a fine line, isn't it? Because I in no way want to disrespect anybody who has any kind of different views on what gender they identify with, but it's a different issue when you're forcing somebody to use pronouns that are just not natural, don't slip off your tongue because you're not used to referring to people like that. It's like you're asking us to change your speech. I think that's a different issue.
And by the way, on that note, and it's great I'm talking to you because you can confirm this most likely. Pronouns are among the first things that we learn when we speak in terms of development, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
And much like we can walk and talk, those are two different activities that are going at the same time because we actually built it into our motor skills. It is very difficult when we've spent our entire life literally saying pronouns in a certain way. Yeah. I'm clumsily trying to make the argument that it is literally on the tip of my brain and it gets out before I even know what's coming out because it is part of my nature, much as just walking and chewing gum.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. We're when we say he instead of they or she instead of they, I think the vast majority of the time we're not being intentionally obnoxious. We're just going with what's been programmed from decades of speech.
So you would agree with me then that you can't completely rule out that she may be under some kind of a sway or influence of him.
An indirect sort of gradual over time influence of him. To me, that's very, very feasible. Him they literally standing behind a character, threatening them to say certain words.
It's hard.
It's possible. Yeah, it does get hard. It's possible. I'm not saying nothing like that's ever happened, but I think it's very unlikely. It's not something that happens very often.
Okay, and that's kind of where I was leaning, and I did say the word culty, but there was some language that they used that it sounded mantra-ish almost, or like repeatable, and that's kind of what triggered me personally.
I remember you referring to that at the end of your video, but you'll have to remind me, please, Eric. What was it that they said?
I don't
sounded
recall.
Cultish?
I was swayed, and my memory just lapsed. It's not programmed in. Thank you so much. This is a good help, and I want to know not only what you think, Doctor, but also what everybody else thinks. Everybody, check out Dr. Shaham Das. He's at a Psych for Sore Minds, and you can get a better feeling on what's going on around us. And you got a book too.
I do have a book, yeah. So as a consultant forensic psychiatrist, I assess and rehabilitate mentally disordered offenders, and part of that is acting as an expert witness. So I give psychiatric evidence in criminal trials. So my book is like my professional memoirs. It just kind of talks through some of my most fascinating and gory cases, and it's called In Two Minds. It's on Amazon.
I hope you have you're planning a sequel, because you're far too young to have memoirs.
I'm older than I look.
Okay.